Hello everyone, my name is David Sloan. I work for the Paciello Group and I'm introducing the next presentation as part of Inclusive Design 24. This is the 8th presentation, so we're already a third of the way through the day. And we're going to hear from Andrew Arch about accessibility work in the Australian Government. Andrew works in the Digital Transformation Agency in the Australian Government and has responsibility for accessibility and inclusivity issues for people with disability, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, older people and other diverse groups. And he works across different product teams and organisations within government to ensure that accessibility and diversity is included in activities. Andrew's worked with the web since 1994, firstly with Vision Australia, doing accessibility consultancy and training, and also with W3C, including work on the Way Age project, looking at the intersection of web accessibility and inclusive design for older web users. So he's had a long role in promoting accessibility, whether through W3C or through other organisations. And I'm looking forward to hearing this talk from technical conformance to user-centred design in the Australian Government. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, David. Pleasure to be able to talk about what we're doing here in Australia. Because we're so far away, sometimes we feel a little bit isolated. So opportunities to join in global presentations like this are always good, and to hear what's going on around the rest of the world as well. I heard Jason Kiss talk earlier today about what they're doing in New Zealand, and I'm going to certainly be following up with him on some of the stuff they're doing over there. So just a little bit of the sales pitch first. Now, what is the role of the Digital Transformation Agency here? We're a fairly new agency. We've only been running in two guises: the Digital Transformation Office initially, and more recently in the last 12 months, the Digital Transformation Agency. So we're we're only about 2 years old here, but we were established by the then Minister for Communications, now our Prime Minister, to assist the government to guide and oversee and drive the government's digital ICT transformation agendas and work with other agencies to drive a lot of that. It sort of comes from the fact that we reckon that users' interactions with government should be as good as they are with modern businesses. But when you look around the world, typically this isn't the case, and it's certainly not the case here in Australia. We've taken the historical approach, I suppose, that we know what citizens need to do from us, what information they need to do from us, get from us, and we put out the way we think it should be. So that's the problem we're trying to solve: is how to make citizens and businesses' interactions with the government much better than they are. So the DTA provides policy advice to government, provides some project assurance across government. We're now getting involved in budget bids to make sure that they're being put forward in the right sort of form, that they're going to actually transform the way that we conduct our business. We provide some strategic oversight on a lot of those big ICT projects, and we work with agencies to help them deliver better products. And I'll mention a couple of those that I've been personally involved in as we go through. So what we're trying to achieve is simple, clear, fast government services for everyone. And anybody who comes to government doesn't come because they really want to buy something, or they're coming for entertainment. They're coming to government because they have to, because they often have a compliance, or government's the only source of certain bits of information. So that's our motto: simple, clear and fast is what we're trying to achieve. And as part of that, we're telling the agencies it's not about building apps or websites because it's nice to do. It's about changing the way government thinks about its service to focus on the user needs and how users, in the end of the day, want to interact with government. It's interesting, this line: it's not about building apps or websites, it's about changing government to focus on user needs. quite a few inclusive design type presentations, workshops, seminars I've been at in the last 12 months have used the same sort of line, maybe phrased slightly differently, but saying it's not about what you build, it's about the service you provide that focuses on user needs. So I think we're on the right track there. Just to set the scene, thought I'd present a brief history of where Australia, or Australian government in particular, has come from in terms of web accessibility. 1992 was when our Disability Discrimination Act came into force, effectively pre-web or pre-commercial web, pre-government web. As David said in his introduction, I got involved in the web in the early 90s. I think it was 93, early 94. In state government at that stage, but really the web didn't arrive till the mid to late 90s. 1991, WCAG 1 came out, and the Australian government endorsed that for Commonwealth government in 2000. So we were a fairly early adopter back then, and all the Commonwealth agencies allegedly said, "Yep, no problems, we'll take this on," and we had very, very sporadic, limited adoption. Some agencies much better than others, but it was fairly haphazard in terms of how accessibility or WCAG 1 was adopted. In 2000, we had the Olympic Games here in Sydney, and the Sydney Olympic Games Organising Committee was actually taken to court by a person who relied on a screen reader. Because he couldn't buy tickets in the first instance, and then when the games were on, he was having trouble accessing the results because Australia's was as parochial as the next country, and the only results that were in our newspapers and on radio and TV broadcasts were generally the sports that we were participating in. And Bruce Maguire was interested in a whole lot of other sports and couldn't access them. So he made a complaint, ended up going to court, ended up in the High Court, and was found in Bruce's favour, which clearly demonstrated that our Disability Discrimination Act applied to the digital world as much as it did to the physical world. 2008, WCAG 2 came out, and again, we were fairly early in endorsing it here in Australia in 2009. But when we did endorse it, the government said, due to the way WCAG 1 was adopted, we actually want some measurement and we want a strategy for migration. And so in 2010, the Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy came into place. Ran for 4 years from 2010 to end of 2014, and we now have the Digital Service Standard that I'll talk more about. But our Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy, as I said, was a migration from WCAG 1 to WCAG 2. We had fairly high levels of adoption. Probably no one was perfect, but some of the measures were in our baseline measurements. We had no positions that were primarily to support web accessibility. Towards the end of that stage, we had over 65 positions particularly across the larger agencies, but a few in smaller agencies whose primary job was helping web accessibility. We also had in Australia from 2010 and running through to 2020 a national disability strategy, and the web accessibility strategy and the digital transformation standard now is supporting that. Similar to many other governments, I've put on the screen here the New Zealand Government Web Toolkit and the Canadian Government Stand on Web Accessibility, where we took the approach that it was a technical requirement. And the National Transition Strategy for Web Accessibility was to drive the adoption of that, of the technical requirements under WCAG 2. But as we all know, you can create something that's technically good, but might not work for the users. And I've just put on the screen here a image that I picked up last year from @dodgydesign_ on Twitter, where there is a ramp going up onto a median strip down the middle of a road. The ramp may be technically correct. It may have the right slope on it for a standard person in a wheelchair as defined under some legislation. But right at the top of that ramp is a lamp post, bang smack in the middle of the median strip, and anybody in a wheelchair would have trouble getting past that because of the positioning of it. They may have to put a wheel up the side of the ramp, and then to get past it, drop a wheel back onto the road and back on again. So built technically correctly, but no account taken of how somebody might actually want to use it. And the other, on this screen, I've put up a graph that shows the estimates of relative cost of rework as we move from design to implementation to beta testing to final release. And as we all know, that if people are just told conform to the standard, and it often gets left till afterwards because it's, oh, we didn't do that, we better get it tested, oh dear, we haven't conformed, and oh dear, it's going to be so expensive, and we tend to forget about it. So, I've used this graph quite a bit lately to illustrate just why it's so important that we adopt accessibility very early in the design phase and not leave it till later on, because it just blows the costs out of the water and as a result often gets overlooked for budgetary reasons. So what about Australian government in 2017? UX Australia last year had Paddy Moore talk about ageing and usability and accessibility and a variety of issues. And I liked this quote from her: accessibility is just the beginning, it's usability that makes the difference. In the commercial world, you'd probably go elsewhere if you got poor service, but government does have a monopoly, as I sort of suggested earlier, and we have to do better. In fact, it costs government as well as citizens if we don't. There's a cost to government from people ringing the call centre, going into the office if they can't complete something online. So many governments now are taking a user-centred approach to how we design services, and we're doing the same thing here. A lot of it probably started more formally with the UK's approach with their government digital service, and that's sort of the model that our ministers wanted us to take here. So our government digital, our digital service standard is setting the standard for delivering services that are better for users and more efficient for government across the Commonwealth government. We've got a couple of states now that are starting to follow suit. South Australia is an early adopter, but a lot of the states are looking at what we're doing very closely and saying, okay, we probably should be doing very, very similar things. We modelled our standard on the work in the UK, but then rationalised it for what would work here in Australia, given our different backgrounds in terms of usability, accessibility, and the way government operates. We also have a set of design principles that underpin the standard, and I've just highlighted 3 of them here on the screen. Start with user needs, not government needs. If you don't know what the user needs are, you won't build the right thing. That drives a lot of what we are advising agencies. Number 6, principle 6 is this is for everyone. The people who most need our services are often the people who find them hardest to use. Let's think about those people from the start. And one of the issues typically with government is that historically we haven't got out and talked to our users. We've tended to assume that our users are people like ourselves. And a lot of people in government have high levels of education, are fairly technically literate, high levels of literacy and so on. So a lot of the user research that we've been doing over the last 12, 18, 24 months has actually opened the eyes of a lot of people who have gone out on user research to actually talk to individuals in the context of where they're using the service as well, and made them really appreciate how hard we've made it in the past and how much work we've got to do to actually make it easy for people to interact with us online and understand the information that we're providing. Number 9, principle 9 says be consistent, not uniform. And the idea there is that we should be using the same language and the same design patterns wherever ever possible. We're not saying that every government website needs to look the same, but we want a whole lot of consistency about the way that the sites are redesigned over time, and that they're using the same types of design patterns to build menus, create forms, the widgets that people might use, the way that modals might be operated, and I'll mention some of the work that we're doing to actually try and drive some of that in a few minutes. So our digital service standard has 13 criteria, and 6 of those quite specifically talk about the user, and underneath many of those we talk about the diversity of users that need to be considered in adopting the guidelines that the digital service standard provides. Just run through those. Number 1, understand user needs, builds off the principles. Understand user needs, research to develop a deep knowledge of users and their context for the service. So we don't want to bring users in and interview them in our office, although we sometimes do that. We don't want to have focus groups are useful, but you tend to get a group think then. What we really like to do is to go out and talk to the users in the situation where they're trying to access our service. So it might be in a government office where we might have digital access available, but more often than not, it's likely to be in their business or in their home, or maybe in a public space somewhere. And underneath that, we specifically advise the agencies that they need to be looking at the broad range of users. So not just people with disabilities, but in Australia, Australia's been built on immigration, and we still have a high level of immigration here. And we reckon that agencies need to be going out and talking to new refugees, older groups of immigrants and so on, to understand those needs as well as people with disabilities. Agile and user-centred process is criteria 3, design and build the service using the service design delivery process, taking an agile and user-centred approach. And we want people, as they're going through that agile approach, through sort of a discovery phase, a prototyping phase, a beta build phase, and then going live, that they are continually researching those with the range of users that the service is applicable to. Consistent responsive design, we're building mobile first, and as I mentioned earlier, trying to build more consistency into the way that things are built. But underneath that, we're expecting the testing for responsive design to be provided on a number of different platforms and devices that people might be using. Making it accessible is the one that kind of specifically addresses accessibility, and underneath there we talk about requiring it to conform with WCAG 2, but also that it is usable by people who are using a common range of assistive technologies or adaptive strategies to access that. Test the service from end to end, again, requires people to be sure that they're testing it with a common set of platforms. And finally, we're saying it's not only about the digital experience, because some people won't be able to use the digital channels in all circumstances, sometimes not at all, due to being in a remote community, or because their needs are so complex, or because they're just not digital like some of the people in the older age group. So what we're encouraging over time is that people will be able to tell their story, not have to repeat their story when they try and interact with government, online, and then go offline and have to, re-advise the people who are trying to help them about what all their circumstances are. So we want to have that seamless digital, non-digital, back to digital, where it is practical and possible. We also require the product to be developed using multidisciplinary teams, and that includes not just user researchers, designers and developers, but people with the subject matter expertise, people from the policy area, people from security and privacy, people from call centres and front that are dealing with the public, and service centres who may have a deeper understanding of what some of those challenges are for people and why they're coming in and wanting to deal with government. But on top of that, one of the things that we're trying to do is stress that accessibility doesn't have to be understood across the board by every single person in the team. We're trying to turn accessibility from the elephant into the room to something that each individual can have a small area of responsibility for. Who's responsible for what aspects and at what stages of the product's development. So we're developing some similar support products that Jason mentioned earlier today. Things that we're starting with are a content guide, a content strategy, a UI kit, type of things that will all end up in a service manual or something similar as we further develop those. We've also got a number of communities of practice, particularly around service design at the moment and around content design. We've got a content guide and we've got a design guide and UI kit that we get now getting feedback from a number of agencies as they work with those. And all of those things the content guide and the design guide and UI kit have got lots of accessibility aspects sort of built in throughout them. And the communities of practice, it's surprising how often we end up on accessibility questions as people are seeking further information about what they should do in particular circumstances. Just put on screen a screen grab from the GovUA content guide, which is designed to help the government teams design simple, clear and fast, to use our byline again, content, but create accessible content that includes everybody. And within that content guide, we've got specific advice on accessibility and inclusivity, and we want people to be able to design in content that everyone can use. So we're stressing things like good semantic structure, alt text, requirements for multimedia, and then we talk about different formats and things like that within that guide. And we've that was only launched in its in this format a couple of months ago, and we're already getting feedback that a few agencies are saying, we've just been restructured and we're not going to build our own design content guide. We're going to work with this, which is really nice to hear. It's obviously hitting a gap in the government content preparation area. So we take a phased approach, research, design, test, iterate as we go through that sort of agile approach. And we stress that research is a team sport. We want the product teams, the multidisciplinary teams, to make sure that they're all participating in the research. They're all going out and seeing people use initially trying to discover what the problems are, and then seeing people use the products that are being designed and tested so that they can iterate and have build some empathy for the user. And it's been quite an eye-opener for many teams who haven't seen people who can't use a mouse, for instance, or can't see the screen, actually interacting with computers, and give them a real appreciation for why we're trying to make this much simpler and easier particularly for people with disabilities. So the research continues throughout the design, the test and build as part of iterate as we're going along. Some of the people that we've worked with, Sean is a C3 quadriplegic, had a mountain biking accident about 15 years ago, uses an electric wheelchair that he drives with his chin, and talks to his computer, and uses a spot on his forehead to drive a virtual mouse. And He's been involved in a number of projects here in Canberra, both during the research stage about what would make it easier for him and for some usability testing to say, okay, so we think we've built this the right way, we've built, followed the guidelines, we've taken your advice. Does this work for you? Can you now use the prototype that we're putting together? Mandy uses screen magnification and also then for large blocks of text because of a reading dyslexic related disability that she's got or impairment she's got, has large blocks of text read out to her. So she's got a mixture of things. And again, she's one of the people who said, don't give me too much text. And quite a number of our user people have done user research with and usability testing as we're building products, both from a disability perspective and from a non-English speaking background perspective, a different cultural perspective, where English is their second or third language, have said, give us less text. Let's get to the point much more quickly than government typically does. And actually having that experience from the users has actually driven a lot of text reduction in a number of products that are being redeveloped and the explanations that are being provided for the different services. Scott uses JAWS, and again, for people who on the research, on the multidisciplinary teams that are building or redeveloping products, seeing somebody like that who can't see the screen is using the services that they're building or redeveloping in a totally different way from anything they've ever experienced is always such an eye-opener for them. I've always loved taking people out to see people with disabilities use the computers in a way that most people can, you can read about it, you can see pictures of people doing it, you can watch a video, but actually being there and talking to them about their experience really does make a difference to the whole team if they can be involved in that. We've also found that the user research with people with disabilities is actually influencing policy. So actually getting some of those policymakers out in that user research and getting them involved in the usability testing has had an influence. For instance, we've got a big identity project going where we're trying to get a whole of government approach to identity. And one of the things that we do have here in Australia is a document verification service that different government agencies use. So if somebody comes up with a birth certificate or a citizenship certificate or a driver's license, that can be verified through our Attorney General's department. Going out and talking to some people with vision impairment revealed that, of course, they don't have driver's licenses, but they do have a vision impaired travel card that has their photo on it, but is actually, and is often issued by the driving authority or the traffic authority in the particular states, but isn't actually incorporated in the document verification service. So the policy people are going back and talking to attorney generals and say, hey, look, we've got a group of users here who have legitimate photo ID, but you don't know about them. So it's actually allowing the policymakers to raise some of these things back with the policy agencies. Another example, usability testing with some people with learning difficulties convinced the security subject matter expert to change the code that was sent to their mobile to confirm that that's who they are, from 9 alphanumeric characters to 6 digits, just because of the memory and the fact that they were being, these people were transcribing it down on a bit of paper, then going back into their system to enter it again, and it was just causing such frustration and misentry of those codes that were being sent. So it really does make a difference to how we're building the products to get out and talk with the people that we're building them for. Some research highlights from one of the products that was investigating just generally how citizens are dealing with government. MyGov, which is the login portal to a number of government services. Some of the things that was said, that feedback that we got was they're able to deliver Braille versions, but the lead time is long and it's obvious often after the deadline to respond had expired. people described themselves as giving up or putting off dealing with government because the process was just too hard. And there's a range of other quotes on the screen. Need to change the address with Centrelink, which is our social security provider in government. That will be a bit daunting. I'll probably get around to it. But Peter, who was 66, was just put off because of his experience with dealing with government. To quote Stephanie at 43, the MyGov website is a bloody nightmare. I tried to sign up, but basically it wouldn't verify me. It wasn't really accessible. I couldn't log into it, let alone do anything. MyGov is something that we've actually recently redesigned, totally redesigned to be much more usable, much better process flows, and much more accessible than the previous one. And we're getting very, very good feedback right across the community, including from the people in the disability community, saying that they can actually use it much more easily. And they can use it on their mobiles now, something that they couldn't do in the past. A couple more users that we've talked to other vision impaired people. Stephanie was was scanning a document using Scanbox and her mobile phone, and then getting it read out to her because she needed to provide some information back into her system from something that she'd had. And again, this totally blew people away that people could actually do this even if they couldn't see the document that had been sent to them. And Peter, who on the screen there, you can see some audio equipment in the background. He actually participates in a community radio station, hence the audio equipment there. But he was using JAWS to try and apply for a working with children check for something that needed to be done. And he found that he just could not proceed during that process. And again, going out and talking to him in the situation with the technology that he's using, and realising that he was a fairly technical person even, and so for somebody who would be potentially much less technical, just highlighted to the development team how hard we're making it for people to interact with government compared with, and I think he used the situation doing his online banking. At CSUN earlier this year, Kelly Lim gave the opening keynote, quite inspirational in some of the things that she was describing, the challenges that she'd had growing up as a person with a disability. But something that I really liked what she said was, if the environment fits you, you shouldn't have a disability. And really, that comes back to something that Tim Berners-Lee has been very strong about, is that on the web, we create disabilities for people and put them in the situation where they can't use stuff because we don't do it the way it was designed to be built. So it really does emphasise that it's what we should be doing is considering our users right from the start. It's their experience at the end of the day that is what we need to do. Following WCAG is definitely part of the process. But if we don't consider the usability aspects of it for people who might have a disability or an impairment, then we can get it as technically right as we might do, but it's still going to be really, really hard for them to actually use. So what we're trying to stress through our digital service standard here in Australia is, yes, you've got to take account of the technical requirements in WCAG, but we're really stressing that it's about considering the accessibility considerations right from the start, right from the problem definition through the design, through the prototyping and testing. Is this solution actually going to work for people? Through to the beta testing with a smaller group and a growing group of people, and then going live with a product at the end of that whole process. And we're also stressing that it shouldn't be something that you treat like a project where it has a beginning and an end, but you need to treat it like a product, and you need to continue to maintain it, and you need to continue to, maybe not with the same intensity, but you need to keep revisiting as technologies are changing and people's expectations are changing, and say, okay, it's not put out there and going to be left for 5 years, but we're going to review it on a regular basis with the wide range of users that we've that are potentially using it, and we need to iterate it and continue to refine it. So we might start with what is a minimum viable, minimum lovable product, but we want to actually make that better, that experience better and better over time as we go. That's about all I want to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And if there are a few questions, I think we've got a few minutes left at this stage. I'm more than happy to answer some of those. Obviously, the slides will be available, and in those slides, I will make sure that we've got links to much of the material that I've talked about today.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I have loads of questions. It was really interesting to hear your experiences in Australia, and I just wondered whether you had specific advice on how best to make people aware of and value their responsibility for accessibility. I mean, it seems like a very sensible approach to distribute responsibility, but how do you get people to buy into that responsibility and then learn the skills required to meet that responsibility?
Very, very good question. Thanks, Dave. What we found after the National Transition Strategy finished is that people thought, okay, we run this project, we don't need to worry about accessibility anymore. So we sort of fell into a period for a year or two at the end, 15, even into 2016, where it wasn't being driven internally. What we're now finding, though, with our digital service standard and the promotion that we're doing around that across the government, is that getting the content designers, the content authors, the interface designers, the service designers, the graphic designers even, and then the developers to participate in the user research and the usability testing as they start to prototype and build something, is actually giving them that empathy to say, look, this isn't just an academic exercise to follow WCAG, it's actually about helping these people that we've actually seen today or last week use our services better. That's really the thing that is making a difference. And so, in our service design community of practice and our content community of practice, we've had quite a number of live events that we actually at different times have been able to stream to other agencies that aren't where those live events have been held. We've held them in Sydney and in Canberra, where the majority of government is. We intend to hold them in Melbourne and hopefully Brisbane as well in the not too distant future. But we're getting very, very big turnouts to those live community of practice events, as well as the discussion that's going on online. And at some of those events, we've actually had people with disability or people from different cultural backgrounds come and talk about their experience and how they interact with government. And that, again, it's turning it into somebody or some people that people can relate to, and their experience in trying to understand or access the information or the service that we're finding is making a real difference to how people go back to their day job of putting stuff on the web, writing for the stuff, or designing a new service to match a new government policy or a requirement to get stuff online. That empathy is really what seems to make the big difference there. And in conjunction with that, we're teasing it apart and trying to say, okay, you're responsible for content. There's only half a dozen things that you need to know to do your part of the job. And we're teasing that out, a bit like Jason said earlier. We're not trying to get everybody to understand WCAG, but we're saying in your job, you need to understand not these bits of WCAG, but this stuff about accessibility and how you can make it easier for everybody, including people with disabilities, to understand the stuff that you're writing or the forms that you're building or whatever it might be. So there's overlapping responsibilities, but we're trying to make it clear that this is their responsibility throughout the different people's responsibility throughout the process, without throwing WCAG at them.
Cool. And given that this is part of a transformation initiative, and government and civil service can sometimes be seen to be resistant to too much transformation. And I think in the UK there have been some of the changes that the GDS has done or tried to do. There's been a level of resistance there because it's fairly disruptive. Have you encountered that? And if so, what have you done to address that resistance?
Well, I suppose, not talking about disability, but talking about transformation, as you asked, Dave. We, at one point, about 12 months ago now, probably had the idea that we would go down the UK route and have one website to rule them all. As we were putting that proposal together, it became apparent to us, talking to all the agencies, that probably wasn't going to fly here because of the devolved nature of the way our government has been set up and the devolved responsibility for the different services and so on under our structure of government. So rather than forcing that approach onto a resistant public service, we said, okay, what else can we do to try and drive consistency in approach across government? So one of the things that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 months here is a content strategy to try and look for the similarities across government and help people manage their through lots of consultation and working directly with the agencies and getting their input into small working groups about different aspects of managing content to get that consistency and helping them realise that sometimes we do have multiple places to find out particular bits of information. And one of the latest bits of strategy that we're actually putting together, because it came out through the consultation with the agencies, is how to manage the accessibility, and they're wanting some strategic advice as well, some practical advice about how to better do things with accessibility. They're also some of the other modules that we've got are around, or that we're working on. They're not there at the moment. They're these are modules that are in draft, are around auditing your content, so that they can actually understand the content that they've got, managing their content, and a number of things like that. So we're actually, instead of trying to get the agencies to come to the centre, we're actually going out to them to work with them and bring them on the journey with us and involve them in the journey rather than telling them how to do it.
Cool. And
just one more point to put in there is that the other thing that we're finding is, because there's pockets across government, often fairly small pockets, that are trying to do it this way anyway, take an agile approach, take a user-centered design approach. What those pockets are saying, finally, we've actually got permission to do it the way we think is better. And so there is a groundswell actually happening from the doers in government to actually try and drive it from ground up, as well as it coming from the Chief Information Officer, CEO down.
Cool. So the next question I had was in relation to evaluation and impact assessment of the work you're doing. How are you measuring the effectiveness of your activity in terms of, for example, technical conformance, but also impact on people and the changes to the effectiveness of government services?
So one of the requirements for a product that's been through this process, and because the digital service standard is only just over 12 months old, and so not many people, it only applies to work that actually started since then, even though agencies were on notice and we had an interim, a draft version that went through a number of iterations in consultation with agencies for about 9 to 12 months before that. One of the requirements is a measurement and reporting requirement. We're not actually asking them to report against accessibility in the dashboard that we now have up and running, but they are expected to report on cost of service delivery and on user satisfaction within that. So there's a number of things that agencies who are putting public services, services out there, transactional services in particular, are meant to now be reporting on our dashboard. Dashboard.gov.au, I think, is the URL for that. But agencies who have got over 50,000 transactions per year and are developing new transactional services or redeveloping their services are expected to engage with us to go through a check. Often we go through an in-flight process where actually we talk to them on a regular basis throughout the product development about the various parts of the standard. And then there's a couple of gateway checks as they move from the prototyping to building the final product, as they move from a private beta to a public beta, and as they then are ready to turn that into a live product and turn off an old service or release it as a brand new service. So there are a number of gateway checks, and they have to have demonstrated that they've met the requirements of the digital service standard, and that includes criteria 9. Have they met, well, in the earlier stages, in terms of the user research, have they engaged with the breadth of population that are potentially going to be using their service, and including people from different cultures and people with a range of disabilities, before they can move from the prototyping into the beta development. But as they want to move from beta into live, they have to have demonstrated that they have appropriately met WCAG, and we would expect them to have undertaken a formal assessment against WCAG at that point.
Right, and you said that the dashboard website is publicly available.
Reports will be published live on our website. We've published a couple already, including our own products, and one of our own products, in fact, our digital marketplace, has not gone to their live position yet because they did not pass accessibility to the level that we expected them to. So they've now engaged some expert advice to help them move that product up to the level, and then we will reassess them against criteria 9, the one they didn't pass, and in a month's time or 2 months' time, when they think that they've done the work, and we'll publish a new report against that criteria saying, okay, they've met their obligations.
Cool. And just to finish off, what would be your #1 piece of advice to give to other organisations in the public sector, or more widely, organisations in general, on adopting and implementing a user needs-focused accessibility strategy?
Get the development teams to engage with people with disability from the start, understand what difficulties they have accessing either the service that you've currently got or a similar service. If you're in a commercial world and you're looking to build something new, you might be a new, just starting out in the world of digital service delivery. Talk to users, understand what problems they have, what issues they have trying to access those services, and get empathy for them. Yes, you've got to build it technically correctly, but part of it is actually understanding the usability issues as well as the technical issues, and that I find goes a long way to people then saying, oh, okay, we better understand the technical issues as well, because they understand that it's about people, not just an academic exercise to meet their issues. It's real people that they can relate to and they can talk to see why they're doing it.
Cool. This has been a terrific case study, and hopefully will be encouragement and inspiration to others who are looking at accessibility as a workable strategy. Thank you very much, Andrew. really appreciate that talk. Our next presentation is going to be in 10 minutes, and that will be Henny Swan talking about a new set of inclusive design principles. So we look forward to you joining us then. Thank you again, Andrew.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the opportunity.